Titled, Should America Outlaw Homelessness? Now you go, well, outlaw homelessness. I'm not talking about outlawing being homeless or homeless people, like criminalizing homelessness. We've already done that, and it doesn't work. What I'm talking about is direct the federal government to give housing to people. I mean, this is a really simple concept. And Finland just announced that in the next 6 years, they're going to end homelessness altogether. They have the lowest homeless rate in the developed world right now because they've been pursuing this policy for 2 years. It came out of a psychologist. His name was Sam Sembris, or maybe it's Tembris. It's T-S-E-M-B-E-R-I-S. A Canadian psychologist who back in the 1980s started this movement called the Housing First movement. And the simple idea was, how do you deal with homelessness? Now, homelessness was not much of a problem prior to the mid-1980s in the United States. In fact, in the 1970s, this is fascinating. Henry Graber wrote about this over at Slate. A 1976 history of low-income housing in America made the impossibly foreign observation that, quote, the housing industry trades on the knowledge that no Western country can politically afford to permit its citizens to sleep on the streets. Now, and it goes on to say, the word homeless in those days, we're talking about 1976, 4 years before Reagan, Jimmy Carter, just elected president. The word homeless in those days was used mainly to describe persons displaced by war or natural disasters. Now, there were a few people sleeping rough, but it was nothing like what followed, because in Reagan's first year in office, he not only cut taxes on rich people from 74% down to 25% and then raised them back up to around 35%, but oversaw homelessness exploding. How did that happen? Well, he cut funding for public housing and Section 8 housing subsidies in half. Now, this is from the Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson from the 1960s. He, created these public housing and Section 8 subsidies, which, largely eliminated homelessness in the United States for a while. And then Reagan slashed it in half in his first year and then continued to slash housing supports. It's a pretty breathtaking situation. And here we are. I mean, it's far worse than it ever was. Today, 1/3 of homeless people in New York City are actually families with children, and 1/3 of them have somebody working. But Finland said, okay, that's it. We're going to end homelessness. This is really simple. It's like saying we're going to end poverty. We're going to give money to poor people, right? You want to end homelessness, you give housing to homeless people. Now, the Republican response to that is, oh, my God, you've got some of those people who are lazy and won't work. So what? Yeah, there'll be a few, what would you call them? Grifters or parasites are the phrases that Republicans use. I would call them, people who are struggling, people who are unable to find meaningful work, people who are afflicted with mental illness. I mean, there's a whole variety of probable reasons for this, but it's such a small percentage of the population. When Finland, typically 2-3%, when Finland looked at the situation, they concluded, and their first 2-year experiment with this kind of indicates that simply giving housing to homeless people costs the government of Finland 16,000 euros, or about $18,000 per year per homeless person, less than letting them sleep in the streets and then having to pick up the cost of policing and emergency services, medical services, cleaning up the mess, dealing with the courts. I mean, there are a lot of expenses associated with homelessness that society pays, in addition to a radically reduced quality of life for people who live in near large quantities of homeless people. And so this Housing First movement has been adopted now. It's been adopted actually in a number of places, but it's always been individual cities that have done it around the world. And now Finland is the first country to actually adopt it and say, okay, we're going to do it. Now, the problem with implementing this here in the United States, and there's every reason to believe that our experience would be identical to Finland's, by the way, that giving housing to homeless people would actually cost us less than leaving them homeless. But the problem we have is that the Supreme Court in 76, 78, and 2010 with Citizens United basically said that morbidly rich people may, no problem at all, morbidly rich people may own politicians and political parties. And so now you've got the entire Republican Party owned and controlled by morbidly rich people. And those people are saying, no, don't want to pay any taxes. You want to house homeless people? That's going to cost money. I don't want to pay any more taxes on that. And then, of course, you got right-wingers who are just like, what, help people? No, we don't do that. You know, what do you do when someone's down? You kick them, otherwise they won't get up. Well, maybe that's true of a kind of the normal person, but a person who's struggling with the homelessness, a person who's struggling with joblessness, a person who's struggling with mental illness or addiction, no, they need a house first, or a flat, an apartment, a room, and then they need some of those services. Very straightforward stuff. Reagan, by the way, in the 1980s gave this famous speech. This is 1984. This is 4 years after, or 3 years after he cut housing support in half in the United States. He said, what we have found in this country, and we're maybe more aware of it now, is one problem we've had, even in the best of times, is people sleeping on the grates, the homeless, you might say. But they are homeless by choice. This is a speech Reagan gave in 84. Right. He said the problem has been aggravated by new laws requiring mental health institutions to release disturbed persons who have no place to go. Yeah, his laws. He goes on to say, as the political rhetoric heats up, there will be those trying to appeal to greed and envy. Make no mistake about that. What they're trying to do is to suggest that our tax program favors the rich. This is the same anti-business, anti-success attitude that brought this country to the brink of economic disaster, said Ronald Reagan in 1984. I'm reading from a piece in the Washington Post, published February 1st, 1984, titled "Homeless Choose to Be," Reagan says. Reagan, again, reading from the article, Reagan branded the charge that he favors the rich an absolute falsehood. Reagan said he rejected the proposition that supporting government programs for the poor is a form of charity. He said charity is what an individual chooses to do. Reagan did not mention the 8.2% unemployment rate in 1984. That's worse than it is right now. During St. Ronnie's reign, right? And he said, now we can turn to the equally difficult task of streamlining government, making it more efficient. Right. What was his top priority? He said the $180 billion budget deficit. He got the most applause of the day, however, when he told the convention that he would not raise taxes to reduce that deficit. Right. Well, raising taxes is exactly what we need to do. We've got a serious problem with morbidly rich people in this country, which I will give you some more details on the other side of this break.